14 specialists had failed to explain why billionaire Cormac Whitlock was dying. But 40 minutes away, a driver waiting outside his mansion had already noticed the pattern. Every time Cormac's brother visited, his condition got worse. And inside the gift that brother brought him, wrapped in silver tins and good intentions, was enough poison to kill him slowly, without anyone ever realizing it. Cormac Whitlock collapsed for the third time that month at 6:47 in the morning, face down on the marble floor of his own study. A teacup shattered beside him, dark amber liquid spreading across the stone like something bleeding out. His housekeeper found him convulsing, hands curled into claws. By the time the private physician arrived, Cormac was conscious again, but shaking too badly to sign the release form for another round of tests he already knew would come back empty. $40 million. 11 months. 14 specialists across 6 states. And nobody could tell him why his own body was turning against him. The most recent neurologist, flown in from Johns Hopkins on Cormac's dime, had used the word that made his blood go cold. Psychosomatic. As if a man who'd survived 3 hostile takeovers and built an $11 billion company from a rented lab space had simply decided, somewhere in his subconscious, to fall apart. Cormac didn't believe it. But belief didn't matter when nobody could offer him anything better. That evening he sat alone at Thistlewood, his countryside estate an hour outside Boston, in a dining room built for 20 people and occupied by exactly 1. He stared at his own trembling hands under the lamplight and thought, for the first time in his life, that he might die without ever knowing why. 52 years old, worth $11 billion, and he couldn't button his own shirt cuff that morning without his valet quietly finishing it for him, both of them pretending not to notice. Nobody in that house understood what it felt like to be the smartest person in every room and still be dying blind. Nobody, it turned out, except a man who wasn't even supposed to be on the property at all. Desmond Okaforeas had worked the Averetown steel mill for 12 years before the layoffs came, and after that he'd taken whatever kept the lights on. He was 39, raising his 9-year-old daughter Amara alone since his wife Marisol died 4 years earlier, and he had not slept a full night since the day doctors told him her seizures and failing kidneys were connected to something in their old rental's well water. Heavy metal contamination, years of slow exposure, the kind of thing that doesn't show up until it's already rewritten someone's blood. Desmond had spent 2 of those years doing industrial runoff cleanup for a contractor that asked no questions, and he carried a guilt he never said out loud, that he should have tested his own water before he ever tested anyone else's. Amara had inherited a form of epilepsy Desmond privately blamed on those same poisoned years. He carried her rescue medication in his jacket pocket everywhere, the way other fathers carried wallets. So when the temp agency offered driving work, ferrying nurses and specialists to a rich man's estate, $40 an hour, Desmond took it without asking questions. $40 an hour was groceries. It was Amara's medication, the part insurance didn't cover. It was the difference between the lights staying on and staying off. He started driving to Thistlewood 3 times a week. He sat in the kitchen during the long waits, drank the staff's coffee, said little. It was a habit from the mill. A quiet man notices more than people expect him to. And what Desmond noticed, over 5 weeks on that same gravel road, made the hair on his arms stand up every single time. The estate ran like a machine built to look effortless. A household manager named Graham Ashworth oversaw it all with the clipped precision of a man who considered himself indispensable. Beneath him, a rotating staff, housekeepers, a private chef, a gardener who tended a glass greenhouse wing that Cormac's younger brother, Silas Whitlock, had built for him 2 years earlier as a gift for his health. Silas visited more than any of the actual doctors. Younger than Cormac by 6 years, sharper dressed, quicker to smile, the kind of man who filled a room with charm the way his brother filled one with quiet intensity. Every visit, he brought a tin of imported loose-leaf tea, dark reddish leaves that smelled faintly of licorice and something bitter underneath. Desmond watched Silas walk his brother out to the greenhouse most Wednesdays, watched Cormac drink from that tin like it was medicine, like it was the one ritual in his collapsing world that still felt like it was doing something. And every single Thursday, the day after Silas's Wednesday visit, Cormac's hand shook worse. Desmond noticed it the way he used to notice a compressor running wrong at the mill, a sound underneath the sound everyone else had trained themselves to ignore. He noticed the cloudiness that crept into Cormac's eyes by evening and cleared again by morning. He'd watched that exact cycle in Marisol during her last year. He knew what heavy metal poisoning looked like when it wasn't in a textbook. He knew what it looked like in someone's twitching hands. 14 specialists were looking for something rare. Nobody was looking at the cup in the man's hand. The first time Desmond said something, it cost him. He caught Ashworth in the mudroom on a Thursday, Cormac upstairs recovering from another bad episode, and said, carefully, that the tea seemed to line up with the worst days. Maybe somebody should test it. Ashworth looked at him the way a man looks at a stain on an expensive rug, in front of 2 nurses, loud enough that one of them had to hide a laugh behind her clipboard. "You're the driver," he said. "Not a question. A correction. Mr. Whitlock has 14 of the finest medical minds in the country. I don't think we need input from the chauffeur. Use the service entrance from now on. I don't want you in this kitchen." Desmond's next paycheck arrived short 2 shifts, with a note from the agency that a formal complaint had been filed for disturbing the client's household. No explanation. No appeal. Just a warning, buried in polite language, that one more complaint would end the assignment entirely, and the assignment was the only thing standing between his family and the eviction notice already sitting in a drawer at home. He almost let it go. He told himself he had Amora to think about, that picking a fight with a household manager over a rich man's tea was a fast way to lose the only steady money he'd had in 8 months. Every argument for staying quiet made sense. None of them mattered, because that night Amora had a seizure at the kitchen table, mild, controlled, over in 90 seconds, and when it passed and she blinked up at him, groggy, already apologizing the way she always did even though it was never her fault, Desmond thought about a man 40 minutes away shaking through episodes with nobody in that entire mansion willing to look at the one thing that changed every week. He thought about Marisol's hands, near the end. How everyone, including him, had a version of an explanation that didn't require looking too closely at the water they were all drinking. He drove to Thistlewood the next morning before his shift even started, before Ashworth was awake, before anyone could stop him at the gate. Cormac took a walk most mornings along the eastern edge of the property, alone, the only part of his day nobody scheduled for him. Desmond found him there. Cormac looked up sharply, wary the way a man learns to be wary when he's worth $11 billion. "I know who you are," he said, before Desmond could speak. "Ashworth mentioned you had opinions about my tea." "I did." "I do." Desmond didn't flinch. "I've got no degree, didn't finish high school, and you've had the best doctors in the country tell you it's nothing. But I've watched 5 weeks of your worst days line up with your brother's visits, and I think somebody close to you is killing you slowly. I think everybody around you is too scared of losing their job to say it." Cormac stood there, hands trembling at his sides, studying him with the hungry attention of a man who'd run out of theories and hadn't realized how badly he needed a new one. "Say that again," he said quietly. "The part about your eyes." So Desmond told him. About Marisol, about the well water, about the metallic taste everyone dismissed as anxiety, the same way Cormac's doctors were dismissing him now. About a cycle he'd already lived through once and buried his wife at the end of. "Everyone in that house works for me," Cormac said finally, voice cracking in a way it hadn't in front of another soul in years. "Not one of them has said what you just said, in 11 months and $40 million. He looked down at his own hands like they belonged to a stranger. "Why would you? You could lose this job just for standing here." "I already lost someone I couldn't save because I didn't say something soon enough," Desmond said. "I'm not doing that twice." Cormac didn't answer that. He didn't need to. Cormac quietly ordered an independent toxicology test, a private lab in Philadelphia, no connection to his household or his company, and told no one except Desmond. He didn't tell Ashworth. He didn't tell Silas, who had, months earlier, been the one to suggest the tea get tested in the first place, a detail that sat wrong in Desmond's stomach the moment he learned it. Whatever that first test had shown, or hadn't shown, nobody had looked at it again. The 9 days waiting for results were the most dangerous of Desmond's employment. Someone went through his jacket while it hung in the mudroom, he noticed, because Amora's rescue medication, always in the left pocket, had been moved to the right, and Desmond never made that mistake. Nothing was taken except a receipt from the Philadelphia Courier Service, tucked in the same pocket, that he hadn't even remembered was there. He didn't tell Cormac at first. Then, 2 nights later, Amora's school called. A man had come to the office claiming to be a family friend, asking which bus she rode home, leaving before anyone could get his name. The secretary hadn't given him anything. But Desmond sat in his kitchen that night with his daughter asleep down the hall and understood, with total clarity, that someone knew he was asking questions, and that someone had just shown him exactly what they were willing to touch to make him stop. He called Cormac at midnight. "I'm not backing off," he said. "But you should know what it's costing to keep going." The silence on the line lasted a long time. "Then we finish this fast," Cormac said. The results came back on the 9th day. Sustained thallium contamination, not enough in a single cup to raise alarm on a basic panel, but steady, repeated exposure over 2 years, sipped in good faith 3 times a week in a glass greenhouse built as a gift. Cormac read the report standing in the same spot where he'd collapsed weeks earlier. Somebody had been poisoning him for 2 years, and the only person who'd never missed a delivery was his own brother. There was no time to sit with it. Ashworth's voice carried up the hallway. "Mr. Silas has arrived early, he's already asked for the tea tray." Cormac looked at Desmond, and for 1 second neither man moved. "Don't let him pour it," Cormac said quietly, and started walking. Silas Whitlock had spent his life 2 steps behind his brother, younger, sharper in some rooms, slower in others, always the one whose name appeared in press coverage as also present. 3 failed companies over the years, funded partly by loans Cormac had co-signed out of guilt more than business sense. What Cormac hadn't known, what it took a Philadelphia lab and a forensic accountant to uncover, once Cormac stopped trusting anyone inside his own walls, was that Silas's 3rd failed company hadn't failed at all. It had been quietly sold, 18 months earlier, to an import business called Verdant Sands Trading, which Silas owned through 2 layers of holding companies. Verdant Sands supplied the exact botanical blend Silas had been gifting his brother for 2 years, timed almost precisely with Cormac's negotiations to merge part of Meridian Biogenics, negotiations that would dilute the Whitlock family's board control below the threshold needed to block a hostile buyout. If Cormac died, or was declared incapacitated, his shares transferred under a decade-old succession agreement directly to Silas as controlling trustee. An agreement drawn up back when the 2 of them still trusted each other completely, back before either of them had anything worth killing over. It wasn't complicated once the thread got pulled. It was exactly the kind of quiet, patient scheme that only works because nobody who loves someone wants to imagine their own brother capable of it. They met him in the greenhouse, late afternoon light slanting gold through the glass. Silas arrived carrying the tin, same as always, and set it on the wrought iron table between them. "Pour yourself a cup first," Cormac said. "Same as you always do." Something flickered behind Silas's eyes, fast, gone almost before it formed. "You've never asked me to join you before." "I'm asking now." Silas didn't reach for the tin. The silence stretched, the faint hum of the greenhouse's climate system, a teacup trembling slightly against its saucer where Cormac's shaking hand had set it down. Desmond, standing near the door, watched Silas's stillness answer the question before a single word did. Cormac slid the lab report across the table. Silas didn't pick it up. He didn't need to. "Thallium," Cormac said. 2 years of it. Sourced through a company you own, Silas. "You've been poisoning me in a greenhouse you built as a gift." The denial came fast, reflexive, and died halfway out of his mouth. What replaced it was something colder. "You were going to erase everything our family built," Silas said. "You called it a merger. You were handing strangers the company our father died believing would stay ours. I wasn't trying to kill you, Cormac. I wanted you slowed down. Stopped. Long enough to save what's actually ours. You didn't protect the family," Cormac said. "You poisoned the only family you had left." His voice cracked on the next part, the part that had nothing to do with money. You held my hand while doctors told me they didn't know what was wrong with me. You knew the entire time. Silas said nothing. There was nothing left that wouldn't make it worse. He moved fast when it came, a single step toward the table, hand closing around the tin like he could still make the evidence disappear if he was quick enough. Desmond was already between him and the door before Silas's fingers found the lid, close enough to see the tin wasn't going anywhere. It's already at the lab, Desmond said quietly. Burning it here doesn't change what's already been tested. Silas's hand fell away. Whatever fight had been left in him went with it. Cormac's security entered a minute later, exactly as briefed the night before, when Desmond had insisted a cornered man with nothing left to lose was not someone a shaking billionaire should be alone with. Silas Whitlock left Thistlewood that evening not as a brother but as the subject of a federal fraud and poisoning investigation that would, within a month, unravel a name that had spent 40 years living comfortably in his older brother's shadow. Recovery wasn't instant. Thallium doesn't leave a body just because the source is removed. Cormac spent the next weeks under real, targeted care for the first time in nearly a year, chelation therapy from a toxicologist who finally had the right diagnosis to work from. The tremors eased first, in fits and starts. Then one morning at the eastern tree line, he realized he could see individual leaves on the far oak trees clearly for the first time in almost a year. Credentials didn't save my life, Cormac told a room full of shareholders, months later, when he finally told the story publicly. Attention did. A man who'd already lost someone he loved to the exact same thing everyone around me was too comfortable to consider. He found Desmond in the front row, where he'd insisted he sit. Sometimes the diagnosis isn't in a lab. It's in the person willing to say the uncomfortable thing everyone else is too dependent, or too polite, to say. Desmond didn't stand for applause. He never did. Cormac had offered him a position first as a field safety advisor, watching the patterns nobody else in the company bothered to notice, and a year of real training later, he led a small unit built around exactly that instinct, human risk, the kind no lab test catches. Amora's care came with it, a Boston neurologist who adjusted her medication so precisely her seizures dropped to almost none within the year. Cormac visited them once, unannounced, and sat at their kitchen table in Averetown watching Amora draw a greenhouse she'd never seen, and understood something his $11 billion had never taught him about being looked after by someone who wanted nothing back. I thought paying people well meant they'd tell me the truth, Cormac admitted to Desmond once, quietly, on the porch. All I did was make them too afraid to lose what I gave them to ever say it. Desmond kept a photograph in his wallet, tucked behind the one of Marisol he still carried every day, himself and Cormac at that tree line, caught mid-laugh, taken by Amora on a disposable camera. He still wished, some nights, that he had understood the sign sooner for years earlier. That grief never fully left. But this time, when a body had been warning everyone that something was wrong, he had listened. He hadn't been able to save his wife. But he had refused to let her warning die with her.